Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into the heart of our E34 M5, tackling a valve adjustment on its legendary S38 inline-6 engine. If you're a fan of the nitty-gritty of engine maintenance, then this video is for you. Alright, let's get started. First things first, in order to get to adjust the valves, we have to pull off the valve cover. This involves first removing some plastic vanity covers to get to the spark plug wires. We remove all 6 of the spark plug wires and also the ignition coil wire, and then lay them off to the side so that they're out of the way. Next we start unscrewing all of the nuts that hold on the valve cover. There's about 24 of them and they're 10mm nuts, so just take them off and then the valve cover will be loose. You can see I work from the outside in when removing these nuts on this valve cover. It's really not necessary, I don't think, on these engines because they're pretty strong, but it's an old habit of mine. Anytime removing something, you want to work from the outside in, and installing it, you want to work from the inside out so we don't warp the cover by applying uneven pressure. Now there's a hose attached to the back of this valve cover that really gave me a hard time trying to take it off. It's probably over 30 years old. It's supposed to be rubber, but it's hard like rock. It's not available anywhere. The dealer doesn't have it, no online suppliers have it, so if anybody knows a manufacturer who makes custom hoses, silicone, let me know, because I'd like to start remanufacturing them. Pop the valve cover off and have a look inside the engine, and look at that, not too bad for a 400,000 kilometer engine. No sludge buildup and not much wear on any of the parts. And here are some of the tools we use to complete this job. I forgot some of them, but most importantly are an air blower, a valve shim kit to adjust the shims, a feeler gauge, and the tool to compress the valve buckets so that we can get the shims out. This part of the job is a very important part if you value your sanity, because when removing the shims we have to actually blow them with compressed air to release them from the buckets. And if all of this oil is here, it ends up splashing everywhere and it gets all over you and it stinks. So spend the extra few minutes to siphon out all of the oil so that this doesn't happen. Next we remove the fan and fan shroud to gain access to the crank bolt, because we need to rotate the engine in order to get the cams to line up to measure the shims. And now the question of why do we even have to adjust the valves? So on a lot of modern engines they use a hydraulic lifter which uses oil pressure to set the gap between the cam and the valve. But on these cars, for many reasons such as performance in the higher RPMs, they use a solid lifter that has a shim that you can adjust. Over time, parts in the engine, such as the valve seat, can wear, and this will cause a change in the clearance of the valves. This can cause so many problems, so that's why we adjust it to be back to spec. And these shims we use here are actually not from a BMW at all. They're from an old Volvo, and they used to be available. I don't know if they still are, but the BMW shims are about $40 a piece. So these are actually in the same spec as the BMW ones, and they work really great. Now we take our measurements between the camshaft and the top of the shim, and we use a feeler gauge for this. We check to see if it's too loose or too tight. And I believe on this one it was a little bit too tight, so we're going to have to pull it out to correct that. And this tool is named Cronk. Well, because...
Pull the lever, Cronk.
Now that the buckets are pressed down, we can get our air compressor and start blowing on the shim. With enough patience, it'll eventually pop out of place and we can pick it up with a magnet. We measure it using our micrometer. And do some math to find out what size we'll need and get it from the kit. Put some oil on there so it doesn't go in dry. Put it back into place. And then we can remove our tool. Now we do another check with the feeler gauge to make sure that it's fixed the problem and that the lash is set within tolerance. Now we turn over the motor and repeat it for the rest of the valves. We do this in the firing order of 1, 5, 3, 6, 2, 4. And I do it on the intake valves first, and then I will do the exhaust valves later. It's just my way of doing it. Now, one problem I found when using this original BMW tool is that on cylinder 6 you actually don't have enough space to fit it. You hit some things in the way. Now you could probably get those out of the way, but I found it's easier just to take off the other piece. And that's why I do intake valves first, so I can just do them all and then put the tool back together and do the exhaust after. Now, those of you that have been around with us since the original videos will know that when we got this car, we changed the spark plugs and we noticed that there was some oil leaking onto the spark plugs. That means some bad valve cover gaskets, so we're definitely going to replace those out now with the OEM good quality parts. And we're going to clean all the surfaces before we put it together. And a touch of RTV where this cover meets the back of the cylinder head. And a little bit of oil that I pour onto the cams to replace the oil that we took off in the beginning of the video. Now, some of you keen observers might have noticed this broken wire here. It's actually not a wire, it's a sensor. It's called the cylinder identification sensor. Now, this kind of works as an old school camshaft position sensor. It uses the signal from the spark on cylinder 6 to tell the computer where the engine is in its rotation. Now this one was taped together, so it finally gave way. So let's see if we can fix it. Here's a diagram of how the parts look. And this is the price for a new ignition wire set. And this is the price for just the sensor, so not exactly cheap. So what I've done, I found one from a 535, which is actually pretty much the same sensor, just a little bit of a longer wire. And now it really matters which direction this sensor goes in, because if you put it backwards, it won't work at all. And then we carefully take off the boot so that we can swap over the sensor. The old donut didn't really want to come off, so I took a tip from the wise Jeremy Clarkson and hit it with a hammer. That seemed to work. Then the new one goes on and we put it back together and it's all good to go. So the test drive went well. Car's gonna need maybe an alignment and maybe a thermostat, but that'll be another video. Catch us next time.